Hello TNA, and welcome to lesson 10 of your energy topic. Today's lesson is on energy resources. Now, before we get started, I want you to make sure that you are ready for today's lesson. So it means you have all the equipment you need, including a blue or black pen to take your notes in, a feedback color pen, or if you just need to underline, that will work as well if you absolutely don't have a feedback color pen, as well as paper to take your notes on. If you have the booklet pages printed out, wonderful. If not, just use any paper you have that you can write on. So, as is always the case, we're going to start with our do now, our knowledge check. So, have a look at these questions, give the questions a go, pause the video, restart it once you have answered the questions. So here we have the correct answers. Make sure you pause the video, get all those in, and then we'll move on to the rest of it. So today we're talking about energy resources, or how we use energy. So energy resources are the ways we use energy. And this is on a larger scale. So this is how our whole society uses energy. So again, any annotations I make are ones that you need to make sure that you are writing down, or anything that I've highlighted, unless you're using a booklet. So energy resources are the ways we use energy. So energy is used in the modern world to carry out useful work or energy conservations that we require. So we use energy in all kinds of different ways. So we use them in homes. So energy is needed in homes, public services, factories and farms, transport. So our homes, we use it for cooking, cleaning, running appliances, anything that you use. Essentially, you can use the idea of electricity. Anything we use electricity, we use energy for, or anything we use gas for. Public services, so schools and hospital, for running machinery, for running the computer you're on now, for anything like that, all kinds of things like that need energy. Factories and farms to run the heavy-duty machines, anything like that, we need energy to make that happen. And transport, getting from one place to another. So using a bus, a train, a car, a boat, a plane. Some of these things, they all need something to make them go, whether that be petrol, diesel, heavier fuels, electricity, anything like that. So we use a system. So a system that can store a large amount of energy are called energy resources or fuels. So this is where the energy we use every day comes from. So where the energy we use every day comes from. So, to achieve the energy needs for electricity generation, so to create all the electricity that we use to transport things and to heat everything, there are several different energy resources we can use. So some of these you can probably already think of. How does the electricity get made? What fuel goes into cars to make them run? All right, all of these different ones have different advantages and disadvantages to them. So we use a mix of energy resources. So a mix of energy resources is needed to maintain the electricity reliability and security. So this means that if one supply becomes unavailable, others can be used instead. So for example, we can't just always use solar energy, because what happens on a cloudy day? We can't always use wind energy, because what happens when we have a calm day? So a mix of energy resources, this is to take advantage I'm going to change that. This is to balance out the pros and cons. To balance out the pros and the cons, or the advantages and the disadvantages of each of these different sources. So any mix of energy resources needs to consider security, energy affordability, and environmental sustainability, both nationally, so both within the UK and globally around the world. So there's lots of things that these energy sources contribute to, though. So these disadvantages can affect lots of different peoples in different ways. One is the big one, the contribution to global warming. So some of our energy resources lead to global warming, which can be a big deal. So we're going to start with non-renewable energy resources. So non-renewable, if you remember from previous lessons, means cannot be replaced as quickly as it's used. So non-renewable energy resources, they cannot be replaced as quickly as it's used. So it can take billions of years for fossil fuels and such to be replaced. So fossil fuels, we have three main types of fossil fuels. We have coal, oil, and natural gas. So you will learn more in year 11 about the differences between them and where these come from. But these are all from living organisms that lived thousands, hundreds of thousands of years ago. That lived hundreds of thousands of years ago, if not millions or billions of years ago. So most of our energy resources come from the fossil fuels, the coal, oil, and the natural gas. So they are very concentrated energy resources formed from the remains of plants and sea creatures that lived millions of years ago. So here we have some advantages and some disadvantages of these fossil fuels. So an advantage is they are very reliable. So reliable means we can count on them. And relatively cheap. So they are inexpensive to use. So they're relatively cheap and they're reliable. We can count on them. They can be easily transported to where they are needed. So if they have, for example, if they need more energy in Birmingham and we have more fossil fuels stored in London, it's easy enough to get those fossil fuels from London to Birmingham. Whereas, for example, if it's a case of the sun shining, we can't transport, if it's cloudy in Birmingham, we can't move the sun from London to Birmingham, for example. The disadvantages of fossil fuels are lots that you've probably already heard about. So the supplies are limited, so we will eventually run out. And they cannot be replenished. So we can't just make more of them. So that's our definition of non-renewable. They also produce carbon dioxide, which contributes to global warming. So the more fossil fuels we use, the more carbon dioxide gets put into the atmosphere, the hotter our planet will get. So another way that we can create energy, especially generate electricity, are nuclear fuels. So uranium, plutonium are also non-renewable. So again, they are reliable and can be transported to where they are needed. Remind me again, what's the reliable mean? That's right, we can count on them. And they can be transported to where they are needed. The disadvantages, the problem with nuclear fuels, is that the waste is radioactive for thousands of years. So this is a dangerous issue. So we can't just put it in a landfill somewhere. We need to make sure that we dispose of it in the best, safest possible way. And still then, there are dangers that someone might uncover it in 300 years, and it still causes an issue. They're also expensive to build. So nuclear power stations are expensive to build and decommission, so close at the end of their working life. Also, if something goes wrong, then it goes very wrong. So I'm pretty sure most of you have probably heard of Chernobyl. So that is a nuclear power station that went wrong. So it was unable to work the way it was meant to be, and it broke down, and it caused big issues. So if it goes wrong, it goes really wrong. So those are our two non-renewable resources, fossil fuels and nuclear fuels. All right. Now I would like you to copy this table into your book. So fossil fuels, so what are two advantages of a fossil fuel and of nuclear fuels, and what are the disadvantages of fossil fuels and nuclear fuels? Using your notes if you need to, I would like you to write one advantage and one disadvantage for each. If you're not sure what they are, go back into the video and rewatch it. So now we're going to talk about renewable energy resources. So a renewable energy resource is one that is being or can be replenished as it was used. So replenished can also mean replaced. So there's a major advantage over non-renewables as they won't run out as long as we treat them with respect. So they also tend not to produce atmospheric pollution. So they tend not to lead to global warming. All right, so having that in your head, write down in your book, what is a renewable resource? You don't have to write it the question if you write it as a full sentence. So hopefully you have this answer written in. A renewable resource is a resource that can be replaced as it is used. So there are many different types of renewable resources. So make sure you're taking notes of these as we go along. And I'm going to ask you to write down advantages and disadvantages of these as well at the end of it. So we're going to start with hydroelectric. So hydroelectric, you might remember, hydro means water. Hydro means water. So hydroelectric energy uses a dam to fill a lake, and when the water is released, it turns turbines to generate electricity. So most electricity is generated by a turbine. So most electricity, or a generator, works by spinning a turbine So we can use falling water to fill a lake, and when water is released or when it falls, it can spin that turbine. So this works either with a dam in a lake or where there's already a waterfall, it will also work. So fun fact, where I grew up, we called all the electricity that came to our houses, we called that hydro. So that is because so much of the electricity is generated by the big waterfall Niagara Falls that was the company that provided a lot of the electricity. So that's why we call our electricity hydro, despite the fact that hydro means water. So an advantage of hydroelectric is that it won't run out. So it won't run out. The water will keep falling unless there's a major, major drought. But because it's just falling water, it won't run out. So a big advantage will not run out. So they tend not to produce atmospheric carbon. So we don't add CO2. No added carbon dioxide. They are reliable and produce large quantities of electricity. So they're not just going to stop in the middle of something. They're always going to be working. So they are very expensive to build as an issue. And very few areas of the world have suitable rivers to dam or waterfalls or anything like that, because you need to make sure that force of that water flowing is what causes it. When you build that dam, when you build something to stop, to catch that water as it's going, you can flood a lot of land, which causes environmental damage and can change habitats. So it can change the whole environment of where something is. So it's a big disadvantage. It's very expensive and it can cause a lot of environmental damage. So that's hydroelectric. Then we're going to look at tidal energy. So tidal energy uses the rise and fall of the tide to generate electricity. So again, the tides are never going to stop. So we're never going to run out. So again, no CO2. They're reliable and they can generate large quantities of electricity. So very similar to hydroelectric in that thing. They are again expensive to build, and very few areas in the world have suitable rivers or areas to use tidal energy. All right, the tidal barges can block sewage, which needs to go out to the sea. Local habitats can also be affected. All right, so they're expensive to build and can't be built everywhere. So few areas of the world. So we've talked about two that use water. We have hydroelectricity and tidal energy. Next, we're going to look at wind energy. So here, the wind makes the blades spin, which again spins that turbine, letting us generate electricity. So again, we're not going to run out of the wind. So we have wind energy, it won't run out. So no added, and also very low carbon emissions. So very low CO2. Again, they're expensive to build, but they are getting less and less expensive. As we're building more of them, we're getting better at it. So that is becoming less of an issue. Large windy sites are needed. So there are some areas of the world where you can't build them. The issue is wind is not reliable. So it's not always windy. So some days it generates a lot of electricity. Some days it doesn't use much. Okay? A lot of people don't like living near wind turbines. They're noisy and produce visual pollution. Okay? They also use up land that can be used for farming. And so they cause other things. The big disadvantage, they're expensive and wind isn't reliable. It's not always windy. So wave energy. So with wave energy, generators are driven by the rise and fall of the waves. So again, we're always going to have waves, and we're not going to add any atmospheric carbon. Again, they are expensive to build. They're also difficult to build. And they are not as reliable because there's not always big waves. They're also not going to work very well in Birmingham because there's nowhere for big waves in Birmingham because the canals don't tend to be windy. So they're only suitable in coastal areas. So, and they can interfere with other coastal activities or wildlife. So you're not going to build them everywhere. So that's wave energy. Geothermal energy. So geo, if you think about geography, is the study of the earth. Geo is the earth. Thermal, you should know what that means at this point, is heat. So geothermal energy is the heat energy stored within the earth. So hopefully you know from geography class that as you go down closer to the core of the Earth, it gets hotter. So for geothermal energy, water is pumped down to the hot rocks deep underground and rises as high pressure steam, which is used to drive turbines. So that water is pumped down underground to the hot rocks deep underground. Also, hot springs uses geothermal energy. So that's water that's been already heated underground and comes back up. The country of Iceland is nearly completely powered by geothermal energy because they have so many hot springs everywhere that they use geothermal energy to power their whole country. So if you go to Iceland, people don't have boilers in their home. The hot water that is used for radiators or is used for showers is actually pumped hot to people's houses because it's so easy to make hot water there. And it's easier to make hot water than it is to make electricity to heat the water. So it has very little impact on the environment because it's going so deep underground, and sometimes that hot water is coming up naturally. So there's also no added global warming. Depending on where you are though, it is very expensive and very difficult. So if you don't see it a lot in the UK because it's so far away, that heat is further away, whereas other places like Iceland, it is a lot closer. So that's geothermal energy. Solar energy, hopefully you do know that solar energy is energy from the sun. Well done. So solar panels absorb heat from the sun and use it to heat water. That's one way. Or solar cells can be used to generate electricity when they absorb light. So you're either using the heat from the sun or you're using the light from the sun. So there's not a lot of impact to the environment, and it doesn't add a lot of carbon dioxide. It's not very reliable. Again, especially here in the UK, it's more reliable when you get in deserts and things. It can be very expensive and you don't get as much energy from it. All right, also, you get no light at nighttime. So if you want electricity at night, you either need to store it or you need to generate it in a different way. And then the last one we're going to talk about here is biofuels or biomass. Remember, bio meaning living things. So the same way that we tend to burn fossil fuels, such as in a coal power plant, we burn coal. Biofuels is when we have fuels made from plant or animal matter. So from fuels made from living things. So one way we can burn wood. We can burn alcohol made from sugarcane, methane gas from rotting animal or plant waste. All right, there's different ways we can use plants or animals to create biofuels. Right? The difference between burning a biofuel, such as wood, compared to coal, is we can grow trees. We can't just make more coal. So the advantage is it's renewable as long as it's replaced at the same rate it's used. So it's easier to transport. So it's suitable for remote rural locations because it is easy to transport. All right. The one big disadvantage of biofuels is they release carbon dioxide when they are burned. So you can only use them on a small scale because they don't give a lot of energy out because it's not as concentrated. So those are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 forms of renewable energy sources. So Now I'd like you to, listing those 7 there, what is one advantage for each of those sources? Pause the video or go back and rewatch if you get stuck, but write down at least one advantage for each of those sources. Once you finish that, I would like you to write down one disadvantage for each of those sources. Again, if you get stuck, go back, rewatch parts of the video that you need to. Or you can look in the booklet that your teacher has provided. So, once you've finished that, and you've gone back and double-checked it using either the booklet your teacher's provided or going back and rewatching the video, then I would like you to give this knowledge check a try, answering all the questions into your booklet or into your paper, and then come back in a moment for the answers. And here are the answers to that final knowledge and application check. Make sure you have all of those answers written down. These last 2 come from your biology topic again. If you're struggling to remember that, ask your teacher for some revision materials on biological molecules, and they will be able to give you some of those. For the rest, until next time,